Washington mornings on the Mall.
105.9 FM.
And AM 630.
WMAL.
6:37 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. It's Brian Wilson, Larry O'Connor taking some time to be with family. We're joined today by Katie Pavlich from townhall.com, an author of the definitive work so far on Fast and Furious. Katie, good to have you here this morning.
Great to be here.
Are we going to go over the fiscal cliff, do you think?
It depends on what the definition of fiscal cliff is. I think that even if we make a deal, it'll be a bad deal, and the country is still going to be in their $800 trillion hole. So I would say, in my opinion, we're already over the cliff. It just depends on how hard we hit the bottom.
There's an editorial that was written by Chris Cox and Bill Archer, who talk about, everybody talks about $16.9 or $16.3 trillion national debt. They say, no, really, when you look at all of the unfunded mandates and the problem with Social Security and Medicare and federal employees and their retirement benefits that they are owed, that our debt actually is somewhere in the neighborhood of $868 trillion. Mm-hmm. $868 trillion, which, by the way, is 550% of their GDP.
Right.
I mean, we're in a world of hurt right now, and now they're talking about. In fact, just the other day, the Treasury borrowed another $24.3 billion. And since President Obama took office, the national debt has increased by $49,000 per household. Mm-hmm. Every household in America owes $49,000 to pay off the debt. That's amazing.
Right. So when you question about the fiscal cliff, I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about is, we've seen so much damage, not only with the Obama administration, but just entitlements in general. We're over the cliff, and it's going to take a lot to fix it.
All right. So a lot of people are saying, well, maybe we need to raise taxes. That's certainly what the president wants to do. We didn't actually plan to have him on at this moment, but Grover Norquist is on the line right now for Americans for Tax Reform. Grover, how are you? A lot of people, it seems, are saying that they're ready to walk away from the Grover Norquist tax pledge. What do you think about all that?
Well, a couple of thoughts there. One, a lot of people, the same 3 or 4 people that said so 2 years ago, are being dragged out again on national TV as if this was something new. There have always been some people who made that commitment to get elected, but weren't comfortable with it, and they don't necessarily want to keep the commitment they made to the voters of their state. There is this bizarre effort by, again, a handful of people to say, well, I don't want to keep my commitment to Grover Norquist. Well, none of them actually made any promise to me. The pledge, as you of course know, is a written commitment to the voters of their state and to the American people that when they go to Washington, they're going to reform government, not raise taxes. When you come to Washington or to the state capitals, and there are thousands of state legislators who've made and kept the commitment, a lot of governors have committed not to raise taxes and kept that commitment. 93% of Republicans in the House and Senate have taken and kept that commitment. We haven't had a Republican vote to raise taxes since 1990 when George Herbert Walker Bush talked a bunch of Republicans into raising taxes because the Democrats were going to cut spending. And, of course, spending went up, not down. So it's a tax increase to pay for additional spending, which is exactly the deal Obama's offering.
Well, here's my question. Do you think the Speaker of the House is going to cave on this ultimately? He's signaling a willingness to go after, some savings by, going back and reworking the tax code and closing up a bunch of loopholes. But do you think ultimately when it comes down to it, he will cave when it comes to raising taxes on millionaires?
Okay. Well, two things. One, what Obama wants is not taxes on millionaires. He could have raised taxes on millionaires in 2009 or 2010 when he had a Democratic majority in the House or the Senate. What the president wants is Republican fingerprints on any tax increase so he can then go back to the American people and say, see, the Republicans stand for nothing. They will help raise taxes for the welfare state, so there's no reason not to vote for us. If he can convince the Republicans to put their fingerprints on a tax increase, he wins. What size, what kind? The idea of taxing millionaires, if the millionaire tax that Buffett was talking about and that the president endorsed would raise $48 billion. The president's own budget plans on increasing debt by $8 trillion. $8 trillion, $48 billion. That's not half of 1% of the problem that's being created. So let's say you passed the Buffett tax on rich people, you then still have $800 billion. I'm sorry, $8 trillion. The numbers boggle the mind.
They do.
I misspoke. $8 trillion in additional debt. Okay, $48 billion. Was what you could raise from that. The $8 trillion is what Obama's running up in debt, assuming he gets his tax increase on the rich that he's been on higher income people that he's been talking about. So $8 trillion. He turns around. Gee, I've taxed all the high income people. We now need $8 trillion. And who do you think he's looking at? The middle of this country. That's who he plans to have an energy tax or down the road a value-added tax. And if the Republicans agree to help him raise taxes now, he'll come back and say, well, we tried to raise taxes on the rich. It wasn't enough. And in the Woodward book about the budget negotiations last year, the White House economist told the liberal Democrats, look, you can't raise enough money to support the government. We want to have just taxing rich people.
All right.
So they know that. They're coming for the middle class. This is a distraction from the coming massive tax increase. They'll call it an energy tax. They'll call it green. It'll be a tax.
Well, what about, Grover, this dishonest, rhetoric of President Obama saying that millionaires and billionaires can pay more, but really they leave out the $250,000 mark. And we're also seeing some numbers today that people making even $100,000 a year, which in a lot of places is actually pretty average for a middle-class family, are going to be seeing a tax increase come January 1st, even if they just have this $250,000 threshold.
Yeah, look, the idea that they're only going to tax a few people was to lull to sleep the rest of the country. It was never true. Remember the first official tax increase that Obama passed within weeks of becoming president, having gotten elected, promising never raise taxes on anyone who earned less than $200,000 a year. The 250 is for married people, 200,000 is for single people. So that number keeps sliding down, and you're right, it's getting towards 100,000. First tax increase was on cigarette smokers. Average cigarette smoker makes $40,000 a year. So, and nobody in the establishment press complained. Why? Because they knew that I'm only going to tax the rich was a fib to distract people.
Well,
there are 8 taxes in Obamacare that hit the middle class directly. He passed those. He signed them. We're
going to have to leave it right there because we're out of time. Like I say, Grover, always a pleasure to hear from you. It's going to be very interesting to say, but when I hear these numbers, I just come back to the conclusion. Man, we're in a mess. Man, we are in a mess. Well, listen.
We're in a spending mess.
That's right.
And the only way to fix that is to spend